He thought she was a fixture of the estate, like the mahogany clock in the hall, quiet, useful, entirely replaceable. When the Duke of Rothley told his wife he could replace her by morning, he didn't expect her to pack. He certainly didn't expect the entire estate to follow. The ledger was heavy, bound in cracked green leather, and smelled faintly of damp paper and impending ruin. Beatrice ran a finger down the column of numbers, her nail pausing beside a particularly damning figure. Coal. The estate was bleeding money on coal, and it wasn't even November yet. She rubbed her temples. The room was freezing. Ironically, the Duke's private study was the warmest room in Rothley House, but Beatrice was currently sitting in the estate manager's cramped office on the ground floor. The manager had quit 3 months ago. Alistair hadn't noticed. He hadn't noticed because Beatrice simply absorbed the man's duties, adding them to the mountain of tasks required to keep a 60-room ducal estate from collapsing under its own bloated weight. Footsteps echoed on the flagstones outside the office. Slow, heavy, utterly unbothered, Alistair pushed the door open. He didn't knock. He never knocked. He stood in the doorway, a striking figure of aristocratic indifference in a tailored riding coat and scuffed boots. He looked at the ledger, then at the ink stain on Beatrice's thumb, and finally at her face. His expression pinched. "You missed breakfast," he said. It wasn't a statement of concern. It was an accusation of a broken routine. The roof in the West Wing collapsed in the night. Beatrice replied. She didn't look up from the book. "I was in the kitchens with Mrs. Gable, moving the dry stores before the rainwater ruined 6 months' worth of flour." Alistair sighed. It was a long, theatrical sound, the sigh of a man burdened by the trivialities of lesser mortals. "That is what servants are for, Beatrice. You are a duchess. Try to act like one. You smell of damp plaster." "If I had waited for the servants, the flour would be paste by now. We are understaffed, Alistair. Half the footmen left when you slashed their wages in spring." She finally looked at him. They had been married for 3 years. It was a transaction, her family's industrial wealth for his dying aristocratic title. She had paid off his debts, fixed his crumbling walls, and organized his chaotic household. In return, she received a title she didn't care about, and a husband who looked at her the way one might look at a particularly sturdy plow horse. Useful, necessary, utterly uninspiring. "I slashed their wages because they were stealing," Alistair said smoothly, walking into the room and tracing a finger over a dusty globe in the corner. "They weren't stealing. They were asking for an allowance for boot leather, which you are legally required to provide." Beatrice closed the ledger. The heavy thud made Alistair flinch slightly. "I need your signature on these drafts. We have to pay the masons for the roof, and the village apothecary is asking for the quarterly stipend you promised." Alistair didn't look at the papers. He leaned against the edge of the desk, towering over her. "The apothecary can wait. As for the roof, have the staff patch it. I need those funds." Beatrice stared at him. "For what?" "A new hunter. Lord Harrington is selling a spectacular gray. I've already committed to the purchase." A tight, cold knot formed in Beatrice's chest. It wasn't shock. It was just a bone-deep, marrow-sucking exhaustion. "You cannot buy a horse, Alistair. The West Wing is literally open to the sky. If it rains again, the rot will reach the load-bearing beams. The house will fall down." "Don't be dramatic. I am being mathematical." She pushed the drafts toward him. "Sign them." Alistair's jaw tightened. He didn't like being managed. He didn't like the flat, unimpressed tone she used. He wanted a wife who simpered, who attended balls in London, who made him look wealthy and powerful. Instead, he had Beatrice, with her ink-stained fingers and relentless practicality. "I am the Duke of Rothley," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. "I do not take orders from my wife in my own house." "It wouldn't be a house at all without my money," she fired back. The words slipped out before she could bite them back. It was the truth, but it was the one truth they tacitly agreed never to speak aloud. Alistair went rigid. His handsome face turned perfectly blank, a mask of aristocratic ice. He leaned in, placing both hands on the desk, caging her in. Your money bought you a name you could never have earned, he said softly. Do not overstep, Beatrice. You act as though this estate would crumble without your constant nagging presence. You think you are indispensable because you tally the coal and order the flour. I know I am indispensable because I am the only one doing it. He let out a short, cruel laugh. You are a glorified housekeeper, and not even a particularly pleasant one. Do not mistake your utility for necessity. He straightened up, adjusting his cuffs with sharp, jerky movements. I will buy the horse. The roof can wait, and if you ever speak to me with such insolence again, I will remind you of exactly how easily a duchess can be retired to the country indefinitely. Beatrice didn't flinch. She just looked at him, her eyes dark and exhausted. You wouldn't last a week without me here. Alistair paused at the door. He didn't even bother to turn around to look at her. Please, I could replace you by morning. He walked out. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him. Beatrice sat in the silence of the damp office. She didn't cry. She had cried in her first year of marriage, when she still thought she could win his affection through sheer competence and devotion. But competence didn't breed affection. It bred complacency. I could replace you by morning. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the unsigned drafts. Then, very slowly, she reached for her pen, wiped the nib clean, and placed it perfectly parallel to the inkwell. All right, Beatrice said to the empty room. Let's see you do it. Beatrice walked up the grand staircase. She didn't rush. There was no frenzy in her movements, no dramatic storming down the halls. She walked into her sprawling silk-lined bedchamber and pulled a single leather trunk from beneath the window seat. She packed exactly what she had brought to Rothley House 3 years ago: 5-day dresses, 2 riding habits, her practical boots, her mother's silver hairbrush. She left the Rothley diamonds in their velvet box on the dressing table. She left the heavy velvet gowns Alistair had ordered her to wear to court. She packed her own ledgers, her own pens, and a small pouch of coins that belonged to her personal allowance. When the trunk was full, she clicked the brass locks shut. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Your Grace? Beatrice turned. Standing in the doorway was Clara, her lady's maid. Clara was 19, missing a front tooth from a childhood accident, and fiercely intelligent. She was holding a freshly pressed morning gown Beatrice's aunt had passed 2 months prior, and staring at the packed trunk with wide eyes. Leave the dress on the bed, Clara, Beatrice said evenly. She pulled on her traveling cloak. I won't be needing it. Clara looked from the trunk to Beatrice. The girl was young, but she wasn't stupid. She saw the set of Beatrice's jaw, the absence of the Rothley rings on her fingers. Are you taking a trip, Your Grace? Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. I am leaving, Beatrice said. She didn't dress it up in polite fictions. Permanently. Clara dropped the dress. It pooled on the floor in a heap of black silk. He threw you out. He informed me I was replaceable, Beatrice said, fastening the clasp of her cloak. I am simply giving him the opportunity to prove it. You will need to speak to Mrs. Gable about a new assignment. Perhaps Lady Sarah needs a maid. Clara didn't move. She stared at the floor for a long moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a small ring of keys, and set them on the dressing table next to the diamonds. Clara. Beatrice frowned. Lady Sarah throws hairbrushes when she's angry, Clara said quietly. And His Grace wouldn't know my name if I had it tattooed on my forehead. If you're going, I'm going. Clara, don't be foolish. You need the wages. You pay my wages, Your Grace. The Duke hasn't signed a payroll docket in 2 years. I'll go pack my bag. Before Beatrice could argue, the girl turned and bolted down the servants' stairs. Beatrice stood in the empty room, mildly stunned. She shook her head, gripped the handle of her trunk, and dragged it out into the corridor. It was heavy. She made it to the top of the grand staircase before a pair of gloved hands gently took the handle from her grasp. It was Osgood, the butler. Osgood was 60 years old, walked with a slight limp from a carriage accident in his youth, and possessed a face carved from granite. He was a Rothley institution. He had served Alistair's father. Allow me, Your Grace, Osgood said. His voice was a low, soothing rumble. Thank you, Osgood. but I'm afraid you cannot carry this to a carriage for me. I am leaving the estate." "I am aware, Your Grace. Clara just informed the kitchens." Osgood hoisted the trunk with surprising strength. I have ordered the traveling chariot brought round to the front." Beatrice felt a sudden hot prickle of tears behind her eyes. She blinked them away furiously. "Alistair will sack you if you order the carriages for me. I can walk to the village and hire a hack." "His Grace cannot sack me," Osgood said calmly, beginning his descent down the stairs. "Why not?" "Because I have already drafted my resignation. It is sitting on his desk." Beatrice stopped on the landing. "Osgood, you've been here for 40 years. Osgood paused and looked back up at her. For the first time in 3 years, the professional mask slipped, revealing a deeply tired, incredibly loyal old man. "I served the old Duke, Your Grace. He was a hard man, but he understood duty. The current Duke understands only himself. Since you arrived, this house has been a home again. You moved my quarters to the ground floor when my knees swelled. You remembered my favorite tea. You kept this family from ruin." He turned back to the stairs. "I have no desire to watch a boy play king in a crumbling castle. I am going to London to live with my sister. The chariot will drop you wherever you wish to go." Beatrice followed him down to the foyer in a daze. The foyer of Rothley House was immense, a cavernous space of black and white marble under a domed ceiling. It was usually quiet at this hour. Today, it was crowded. Beatrice froze on the bottom step. Standing in the marble hall were nearly 30 people. Mrs. Gable, the formidable housekeeper, stood at the front, wearing her heaviest woolen traveling coat. Behind her stood Thomas, the Duke's own valet, holding a battered leather portmanteau. There were the footmen, the scullery maids, the stable hands. Even the notoriously grumpy French chef, Monsieur Linus, was standing by the door, clutching his specialized knife roll. They were all carrying bags. "What is this?" Beatrice breathed. Mrs. Gable stepped forward. The housekeeper was a woman made of iron and starch, but her eyes were remarkably soft as she looked at Beatrice. "Clara told us you were leaving, Your Grace," Mrs. Gable said, "because the Duke felt you were easily replaced." "He was angry," Beatrice said, though she didn't know why she was defending him. "It was an argument." "It was the truth of his character," Mrs. Gable corrected sharply. "We have all worked under him. We have all suffered his temper, his neglect, and his sheer incompetence. You shielded us from it. You paid for little Maggie's doctor when the fever took her. You made sure the kitchens had coal. You treated us like people. He treats us like furniture." Mrs. Gable looked back at the assembled staff, then back to Beatrice. "If the glue holding this house together is leaving, we have no intention of waiting for the walls to collapse on our heads. We are giving our notice, effective immediately." "You can't," Beatrice whispered, overwhelmed. "All of you. Where will you go? How will you eat?" "We are skilled laborers, Your Grace," Thomas the valet spoke up, adjusting his grip on his bag. "Good staff is hard to find, especially staff trained to your standards. We will find positions, but we will not stay here." Beatrice looked at the sea of faces. These were the invisible hands that kept Alistair's life running, the hands that polished his boots, cooked his meals, mended his roof, and stoked his fires. He didn't know a single one of their surnames. She took a deep, shuddering breath. The heavy, crushing weight she had carried for 3 years suddenly felt lighter. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. She had just been looking for validation from the wrong person. "Very well," Beatrice said, her voice finally steady. "Osgood, is the chariot ready?" "It is, Your Grace." "Then let us go." The exodus was silent. There was no shouting, no breaking of glass, just the steady crunch of gravel under boots and wooden wheels as a long, quiet line of men and women walked out of the massive iron gates of Rothley House. Beatrice rode in the chariot, with Clara beside her and Mrs. Gable sitting opposite. The rest walked, heading toward the village where they could catch coaches to London, York, or elsewhere. They left the heavy oak doors of the mansion firmly shut behind them. Inside, the fires began to die out, one by one. Alistair slept terribly. He woke up with a stiff neck and a foul mood. The room was freezing. The thick velvet curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the morning sun. leaving the bedchamber in gloomy twilight. He lay in bed for 10 minutes, waiting. Usually by the time he woke, the fire was crackling, the curtains were drawn, and a silver tray with hot black tea and a single piece of toast was resting on the side table. There was no fire. There was no tea. "Thomas!" Alistair barked, his voice muffled by the heavy blankets. Silence. Alistair scowled. He sat up, the cold air biting at his bare shoulders. "Thomas, are you deaf?" He threw the covers off, shivering violently as his bare feet hit the icy hardwood floor. He crossed the room and yanked the heavy bell pull near the fireplace. It connected to a bell in the servants' hall. He gave it 3 hard, angry tugs. The sound echoed faintly from somewhere deep within the bowels of the house. He waited. He tapped his foot. He crossed his arms to preserve body heat. Nothing. "Incompetent fools," he muttered. He marched over to his wardrobe. He realized with a surge of genuine irritation that he didn't actually know where his everyday waistcoats were kept. Thomas always laid them out. He grabbed a heavy silk dressing gown, shoved his arms through the sleeves, and tied it tight. He opened his bedroom door and stepped out into the main corridor. "Hello," he called out. The word hung in the air, bouncing off the high, vaulted ceilings and vanishing into the shadows. The silence in the house wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. It was the silence of a tomb. Alistair walked toward the grand staircase. His annoyance was beginning to curdle into a strange, unfamiliar unease. He noticed the chill in the air. The vast hallways of Rothley House were usually drafty, but there was always a baseline warmth radiating from the dozens of hearths burning throughout the ground floor. Today the air was damp and biting, smelling faintly of stale dust. He descended the stairs. "Osgood, where is everyone?" He reached the foyer. It was empty. The grand mahogany grandfather clock ticked loudly, the pendulum swinging with a hypnotic rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Alistair frowned. He walked toward the morning room, where breakfast was usually served in gleaming silver chafing dishes. The doors were closed. He pushed them open. The long dining table was bare. No linens, no silver, no smell of eggs or bacon. The fireplace was a mound of gray, dead ash. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked the empty room. He turned and strode toward the green baize door that separated the family quarters from the servants' corridors. He pushed through it. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The floors went from marble to worn stone, the walls from silk paper to whitewash. He walked down the long hall toward the kitchens. "Mrs. Gable, Linus." He pushed open the kitchen doors. The cavernous room, usually a chaotic symphony of shouting, chopping, and boiling pots, was completely deserted. The massive cast-iron stoves were cold. A single copper pot sat unwashed in a basin of stagnant water. On the main butcher block, the chef's knife roll was gone, leaving only a rectangular clean spot in the dusting of flour. Alistair's heart gave a slow, heavy thump against his ribs. He walked back out of the kitchen, his pace quickening. He checked the servants' dining hall. Empty. He checked the laundry. Empty. He walked out the back door into the cobbled courtyard. The stables were across the yard. "William!" he shouted for the head groom. He walked into the stables. The horses were there, shuffling nervously in their stalls, whinnying at the sight of him. But there were no stable boys, no pitchforks scraping stone. The tack room door swung open on a loose hinge. Alistair stood in the center of the courtyard, the cold morning wind whipping at his silk dressing gown. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through his aristocratic arrogance. 60 people, over 60 staff members, gone. He turned and ran back into the house. He took the servants' stairs 2 at a time, his breathing growing ragged. He bypassed his own rooms and headed straight for the east wing, to Beatrice's rooms. He threw open her bedroom door. "Beatrice!" The room was immaculate and completely devoid of life. The bed was made, perfectly smoothed. Her silver hairbrush was gone from the dressing table. He walked over to the table and saw the small, velvet box. He flipped it open. The Rothley diamonds stared back at him, glittering mockingly in the dull morning light. Beside the box lay a small ring of keys. She had left them behind. She hadn't taken anything that belonged to him. "I could replace you by morning." The words echoed in his head, entirely stripped of their venom, echoing now with devastating irony. He backed out of her room and practically ran downstairs to his private study. He burst through the door, his chest heaving. The room was just as he had left it yesterday afternoon. The fire was dead. The heavy velvet curtains were half open. He rushed to his desk. Sitting squarely in the center of the leather blotter was the green ledger from yesterday. Beside it was a neat stack of papers. Alistair sank into his leather chair. His hands were shaking slightly as he pulled the ledger toward him. He flipped it open. The meticulous, elegant handwriting filled page after page, columns of numbers, supplier names, notes on repairs. He turned to the very last page with writing on it. There were no numbers here, just a single line of text, written in Beatrice's steady, unhurried hand. "I have removed the obstacle to your comfort. You are now entirely in charge of your own ruin. Good luck finding a replacement by morning." Below it, stacked neatly, were the letters of resignation, dozens of them, Osgood's penned in elegant script, Mrs. Gable's short and sharp, Thomas's, even rough, misspelled scrawls from the stable hands and scullery maids. Every single one of them citing their loyalty to the Duchess as their reason for departure. Alistair stared at the letters. He sat alone in the center of a freezing 60-room mansion that required 50 people just to keep the damp out and the rats at bay. He didn't know how to order coal. He didn't know how to light a fire. He didn't even know where the pantry keys were kept. He looked around the magnificent, silent study. The tapestries on the walls, the rows of leather-bound books, the heavy silver inkwell, none of it meant anything without the people to maintain it, without her to maintain it. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour. 9 o'clock. Morning had officially arrived, and Alistair, Duke of Rothley, had never been more entirely alone. Day one was defined by aristocratic fury. Alistair spent it pacing the echoing halls, waiting for the staff to come to their senses. He left the heavy front doors unlocked, fully expecting Osgood to walk through them, offer a clipped apology, and begin laying the fire in the drawing room. No one came. Day two was defined by the cold. It crept up from the stone floors and seeped through the towering single-paned windows. Rothley House was a beast that required constant feeding. Without men hauling coal from the cellars and maids clearing the ash grates, the house rapidly assumed the temperature of a crypt. Alistair tried to light a fire in his study. He crumpled a perfectly good piece of parchment, an unread letter from a cousin, and struck a flint over a dry log. It smoked. It choked him. It went out. He didn't know about kindling. He didn't know about the flu. He sat in his leather chair, wrapped in his heavy riding coat, watching his own breath plume in the frigid air. Day three was hunger. He had found the pantry. It was locked. He spent an hour searching for the keys before remembering they were sitting on Beatrice's dressing table. He retrieved them, his fingers numb, and unlocked the heavy slatted doors. There was a flour which he could not bake. There were cured hams hanging from the ceiling, which he did not know how to cut or cook. He survived on stale bread, a wheel of hard cheddar, and a bottle of claret. He ate standing in the kitchen, surrounded by cold copper pots, the silence pressing against his ears until it physically ached. Then came the knock. It was heavy, echoing through the marble foyer. Alistair's head snapped up. Relief, sharp and humiliating, flooded his chest. They were back. They had starved out in the village and returned. He hurried to the front doors, not caring that he was wearing yesterday's trousers and a wrinkled linen shirt. He hauled the heavy oak door open. It wasn't Osgood. It wasn't Beatrice. It was Lord Harrington. He stood on the gravel drive, looking immaculate in a tailored greatcoat, tapping a silver-tipped cane against his boot. Behind him, a groom held the reins of a breathtakingly beautiful gray hunter. Harrington stared at Alistair. His eyes flicked over Alistair's wrinkled clothes, his unshaven jaw, and the vast, dark, empty foyer behind him. "Rothley," Harrington said, his voice laced with confusion. "Did you dismiss your gatekeeper? I had to open the iron gates myself." "And where is your man?" "Good God, man, you look like you've been sleeping in a ditch." Alistair's throat went dry. The pride that had defined his entire existence suddenly felt like a physical weight dragging him down. "My staff is away." "Oh, all of them?" Harrington raised a pale eyebrow. He looked past Alistair again. The house smelled of stale air and dead fireplaces. "Well, I brought the grey. We agreed on 400 guineas. I have the bill of sale right here." Harrington reached into his coat. Alistair looked at the horse. It was magnificent. It was exactly what he had wanted, and he couldn't afford a single hair on its tail. The drafts sat on his desk, unsigned by his wife. The accounts were in her name, managed by her solicitors. He had no cash in the house. He was a duke with a 60-room mansion, and he was completely, utterly broke. "I cannot buy the horse, Harrington," Alistair said. The words tasted like ash. Harrington froze. The polite aristocrat vanished, replaced by a man insulted. "We had an agreement, Rothley. I turned down an offer from the Earl of Sussex to bring this animal to you. I am aware, and I apologize, but the funds are currently inaccessible." Harrington's gaze turned cold. He looked at the empty house, the disheveled duke, and put the pieces together with brutal efficiency. The rumors in London about Rothley's finances had always been there. The marriage to the industrialist's daughter was supposed to fix them. Clearly, something had snapped. "I see," Harrington said softly. It was worse than if he had shouted. It was pity. "I will not trouble you further, Your Grace. Good day." He turned, signaled his groom, and mounted his own horse. Alistair watched them ride away down the long, untended gravel drive. He closed the door. The sound boomed like a cannon shot in the empty house. Alistair walked back to his study. He didn't sit in his chair. He walked to the desk, pulled Beatrice's green ledger toward him, and finally opened it to read. He didn't just look at the numbers. He read her notes in the margins. "The roofers require payment by Tuesday, lest they walk off the job. Mrs. Gable needs a new copper boiler. Deduct from my personal allowance. Alistair will not approve it. The tenant in Cottage 4 broke his leg. Suspend his rent for the winter." Page after page of invisible labor. Page after page of a woman holding up the sky while he complained about the clouds. She hadn't just managed his house. She had managed his humanity. She had kept him from ruining the lives of the people who depended on him. She had paid for his ignorance with her own exhaustion. "I could replace you by morning." He closed the ledger. He rested his forehead against the cracked green leather. For the first time in his pampered, insulated life, Alistair wept. Beatrice was reviewing a shipping manifest when the knock came at her parlor door. Her townhouse in Mayfair was small by ducal standards, but it was violently alive. Fires roared in the grates. The smell of roasting chicken drifted up from the basement kitchen. Clara was currently humming as she polished the silver tea service in the corner. "Enter," Beatrice said, not looking up from the paper. Her family's shipping company was highly profitable, provided one actually read the manifests. The door opened. Osgood stepped into the room. The old butler looked entirely rejuvenated. The London air agreed with him. He stood perfectly straight, his face an impenetrable mask of professional courtesy. "Oh, Your Grace," Osgood said. "You have a caller." "I am not receiving today, Osgood. Tell Lord and Lady Crestmont I will call on them tomorrow." "It is not the Crestmonts, Your Grace." Osgood paused. "It is the Duke of Rothley." "No." Clara dropped a silver spoon. It clattered loudly against the tray. Beatrice's hand stilled. The ink from her pen slowly pooled into a dark blot on the paper. She didn't panic. She didn't feel a sudden rush of romantic yearning. She just felt a deep, bracing calm. "Show him in, Osgood," she said. "Clara, leave us." Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but one glance at Beatrice's face sent her scurrying out the side door. A moment later, Alistair walked in. Beatrice sat back in her chair and observed him. It had been 10 days. 10 days since she walked out. Alistair looked like he had aged 5 years. His clothes were clean. He must have hired a valet at a London hotel, but they hung slightly loose on his frame. The arrogant tilt of his chin was gone. There were dark, bruised circles under his eyes. He stopped in the center of the Persian rug. He looked at the fire, at the tidy desk, and finally at her. "You look well, Beatrice," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I am well," she replied. She did not ask him to sit. He swallowed hard. He looked around the small parlor as if trying to memorize it. "The house is dead, Rothley House. It's a stone box. The pipes froze in the west wing on Thursday. The floor's ruined. You should have called the plumber in the village. His name is Mr. Higgins." "I don't know Mr. Higgins," Alistair said quietly. "I don't know anyone." He finally looked directly into her eyes. The mask of the Duke was completely gone, leaving only the man beneath, and the man looked terrified. "I tried to light a fire," he said, the confession spilling out of him. "I tried to boil water. I couldn't do it. Harrington came for the horse. I had to turn him away at the door like a beggar. I spent the last week reading your ledgers. I didn't know, Beatrice. I swear to you, I didn't know what you were carrying." "You didn't want to know," she corrected flatly. "It was easier to pretend the house ran on magic and my money." "I was a fool." He took a step toward the desk. "I was arrogant and cruel and a fool. You are not replaceable. You are the only thing that kept me from drowning. Please, come home." Beatrice stared at him. She saw the desperation. She saw the genuine remorse, but remorse was cheap when it was born of suffering. "No," she said. Alistair flinched as if she had struck him. "Beatrice, I am begging you. I will apologize to the staff. I will pay whatever wages they demand. I will never speak to you that way again." "I believe you," she said, resting her hands on the desk. "I believe you are sorry. Because you are cold, and you are embarrassed and your house is falling down. But you do not want a wife, Alistair. You want a savior. You want your comfortable life back. And I will not spend the next 40 years being your glorified estate manager while you treat me as an inconvenient necessity." "Then what do you want?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Tell me. I will give it to you." Beatrice stood up. She walked around the desk, her silk skirts rustling quietly. She stopped a few feet from him, her posture perfectly straight. "If I return to Rothley House, things will change permanently," she said, her voice like cut glass. "I am not returning as your assistant. I am returning as your partner. Full legal control of the estate's finances will be transferred to me. You will not buy a horse, a bottle of wine, or a new coat without my signature. You will sit with me once a week and review the ledgers. You will learn the names of your staff. You will learn the names of your tenants." Alistair stared at her. To hand over financial control to a wife was unheard of. It was an emasculation in the eyes of their society. "You want to strip me of my authority," he whispered. "You stripped yourself of your authority the moment you let your estate crumble. I am offering to rebuild it, but I will own the bricks." She met his eyes, unblinking. "Those are my terms. If you cannot accept them, Osgood will show you out, and my solicitors will contact you regarding a formal separation." Silence stretched between them. The fire popped in the grate. Alistair looked at this woman, really looked at her. He had married her for her dowry. He had ignored her for 3 years. He had insulted her to her face. And yet, standing here, demanding absolute control over his life, she was the most formidable, magnificent creature he had ever seen. He didn't just need her. For the first time in his life, he respected her. He slowly lowered his head. He reached out and gently took her ink-stained hand. He didn't kiss it. He just held it, a physical surrender. "Draw up the papers," Alistair said softly. "I will sign them." Beatrice looked at their joined hands. There was no sweeping orchestral swell in her heart, no sudden erasure of the past 3 years. But there was something solid. There was ground they could finally stand on. "I will have them ready by morning," Beatrice said. She pulled her hand back, turned to the door, and opened it. Osgood was standing perfectly still in the hallway. "Osgood," Beatrice said calmly. "Please inform Clara and Mrs. Gable to begin packing. We are going back to work." She walked past Alistair and out into the hall. He followed her. He walked a half step behind her, right where he belonged. If you enjoyed this dramatic conclusion to Beatrice and Alistair's story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who appreciates a brilliant protagonist who knows her worth and refuses to back down. Want more deeply emotional, grounded historical dramas where the characters actually face the consequences of their actions? Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next original story.